Ingles.fm, Real English Conversations, Series 2. Podcast 11. The Weather. Tiempo climático. Este podcast contiene una conversación real y sin guión entre dos hablantes nativos de inglés, Mark y Tom. Oirás primero la conversación y a continuación una clase de inglés con explicaciones en español. Cada podcast viene con un workbook detallado que puedes descargar desde nuestra página web ingles.fm. Incluye una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Recuerda que los miembros de nuestra lista de distribución reciben gratis transcripciones extra de nuestros podcasts, además de muchas otras cosas gratis. Así que no olvides apuntarte al consultar la página. ¡Buena suerte!
Hi, my name's Tom, and I'm sitting with Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Tom.
We're back on Bogatel Beach during the La Merced Festival in Barcelona, and it's a beautiful sunny day, and it's quite windy as well, isn't it? So we hope it doesn't distract you too much.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong breeze coming off the sea.
And that leads us on to today's topic, the weather. Now, talking about the weather, along with sarcasm and an ability to cue, have been found to be the traits which many people believe defines the British. And in fact, they did a survey of 5,000 British people a couple of years ago, and talking about the weather was the #1 British trait. It's used as an icebreaker or a filler for a lull in conversation between people and easy small talk. Now, you were saying before we recorded, Mark, that whenever you speak to your parents, one of the first things they say is, "How's the weather?" or they tell you about the weather.
They always, after the initial conversation, "Hello, how are you, how are things, everything okay?" They'll always give me a commentary about the weather in the UK. It's either pouring with rain or it's been sunny and lovely and the flowers are out in the garden, and asking what it's like in Barcelona. But for 6 months of the year I just say, "Mum, it's April, May, August, whatever, and I live in Spain." So she's like, "Oh yeah, of course, it's sunny."
Yeah, my parents tell me firstly about the weather and secondly about the traffic problems, and that's a regular occurrence as well. It's strange.
I'm sure my mum would if she drove, but she doesn't, so I only get the weather.
So why do British people talk about the weather so much? What's the reason?
I think it's because it changes so much in the UK. Going back to my answer to my mother about living in Spain and 6 months of the year it's more or less guaranteed sun, in the UK it changes, but very, very often. So for example, it's been nice for a couple of days and there's a public holiday coming. For example, you think, okay, I'm going to have a barbecue. You can be guaranteed that the minute you invite your friends to a barbecue, the day the barbecue's planned, it will rain, even in the middle of summer. And like the Wimbledon tennis championships, last week of June, first week of July, there are always rain delays and problems, abandoned matches. Everything that can happen with the weather seems to happen in England at the moment, where they just need 2 weeks of sun for the tournament.
Yeah, we have what's known as very fickle weather. Always goes from constant rain and floods to searing droughts and hosepipe bans.
One extreme to the other, with lots of rain and grey in between.
Now, there's another reason that I found out that we talk about the weather a lot, and it's to do with politeness. Now, English culture is founded upon politeness and a respect for another's privacy, and
so it should be.
And emotionalism was frowned upon, or it was not considered a good trait due to Protestant ideals ever since the founding of the Church of England. Now, asking personal questions historically was considered impolite and embarrassing. Like, you would never meet someone and say, you know, "How are you?" because they might answer, "Oh, my father died," or "My sister's sick," or something like that. So the easiest topic to discuss that would allow both parties to be friendly and social without any risk of emotional distress was the weather.
So just a completely neutral subject that it's nice, it's not nice.
Yeah, so there's a cultural background in it as well as it being changeable. So those two things combined means that we are utterly obsessed with the weather in England. Now, looking more generally at a cultural history of the weather, like any cultural history of weather is really a history of various attempts at controlling the weather. Now, can you go back and name a few societies or civilizations in the past that have been, have attempted to control the weather through various means?
Well, you have the Aztecs and the Mayans in Latin America were obsessed with sun gods and lunar solar calendars to organize time, mathematics, and the exact time in the year with astronomical constellations, comets, things like that. Going even further back, ancient Egypt, they needed to try and harness the weather because back then the Nile Delta was very fertile, and they grew lots of crops, and they had livestock, I believe. So obviously the difference between rain and sun for crops and livestock. But going back to Neolithic times, more or less, since human society has been formed, weather has been an integral part. Even migrating buffalo for the Native Americans normally happened after the grass would come, which after the rain. So they would have their rain dances going back many, many thousands of years. I don't know exactly how long. So every society has been affected in one way or another by the weather and wants to try and control it for its maximum benefit.
Yeah, and another interesting one I found out was Finnish people in our area of the world were believed to be able to control the weather to the point that Vikings didn't ever let them get on boats. So if you were from Finland, you couldn't get on a Viking boat.
They thought it would bring bad weather and bad luck.
Yeah, and this carried on actually until the 20th century, where some fishermen and some sailors were not very happy to have people from Finland, Finnish people, on their boats. So poor Finnish people having that reputation. And Scandinavian witches in history were allegedly claimed to sell wind in bags to sailors, so they would station themselves around ports and sell wind in bags so that sailors could get from A to B. What about cloud seeding? Do you know anything about cloud seeding?
Not a great deal, but I believe it's something to do with affecting a cloud, chemically possibly, in order to make the cloud condense and drop rain.
Yeah, they basically spray or deliver dry ice or solid CO2 or silver iodide, a chemical, into a cloud by aircraft all from the ground. And this is actually used currently in the USA, China, India and Russia. And it works, basically. So they use this, they seed the cloud, they pump this gas or chemical into the cloud, and it produces rain, which can't be very good for the environment, I can't imagine. And hail cannon. We talked about this briefly before. Hail cannon is a giant shockwave generator shaped like a huge cone that's a couple of meters long, and it fires a great big burst of sound at an approaching cloud.
Sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's supposed to disrupt the formation of hailstones in the atmosphere. Now, this is actually still used in various places, and I think still possibly in the USA. And it's laughed about by lots of people. Because it's basically a sort of totally unproven cure for hailstorms, and scientists say, well, hold on a minute, if a burst of sound from a small gun is going to cause hailstones, why doesn't thunder in the same cloud cause the hailstones to fall?
Logical question.
Yeah, so it's basically a superstition, I think. So, cultural differences between attitudes on Earth. On our planet, common weather phenomena include wind, cloud, rain, snow, fog and storms, and there's various different iterations of those weather types, aren't there?
Yeah.
And some of the less common events include natural disasters such as what?
Earthquakes, typhoons, hurricanes,
tornadoes and so on. And attitudes towards weather depend on where you live and how far your life depends on particular types of weather. Can you give us some examples?
Well, say if you're a farmer, then your life is far more governed by the weather than if you work in an office. And if you're in Northern Europe, where it rains quite a lot, you look forward to the summer when it's sunny. Whereas if you live somewhere that's in the tropics and is very hot all year round, I guess you'd be looking forward to the time when it rains. So you have a change from the norm.
Yeah, they did an interesting study in England with an amazing title, which I'll read out. It was called The Effect of Weather on Mood, Productivity and frequency of emotional crisis in a temperate continental climate.
That's impressive.
Yeah, and in this they discovered that in temperate climates, people tend to be more stressed when the weather is unstable or cloudy, and it had a far greater impact on men than women. Don't know why, but men are more affected by cloudy weather apparently.
I don't know. I could hazard a guess, but it may be not very politically correct, so I'll keep that one to myself.
So in temperate climates, rain can cause emotional distress, but in some cultures it can bring joy, as you said, and it can be considered to be soothing, or it has great aesthetic appeal. Places like India or Thailand, when the rains finally arrive after a period of dry, it lifts people's moods. And an interesting fact, in Botswana in Africa, the word for rain is pula, and this is actually also the name of the national currency. So what does that demonstrate?
Well, there's a very strong link between the culture and rain, and I guess there's not very much rain in Botswana, so for them it's a very, very central theme.
Yeah, it's totally linked to the economy, rain. And in the UK and Iceland and places like that have dark, foreboding, horrible winters, they're also known to have very strong creative cultures, like musical or artistic cultures. Why do you think that is?
Well, because the weather is so grim, most people don't go out, so they're indoors, probably very bored after a while, and start thinking about things they wouldn't normally think about if they were lying on the beach or going for walks outside. So they start concentrating, thinking. They got time on their hands, so it's easier to create when you've got weeks and weeks of being locked in a house because the weather's so bad outside.
Well, like, oh, I'm a bit depressed today, I'm going to write a classic rock song, that kind of thing.
Something like that.
And in London we get 650 millimetres of rain a year, and in Barcelona 628 millimetres, but it seems a lot sunnier here. Why is that?
Well, I think in England, because it's much more northern in latitude, that you get the rain over an extended period, so it always seems to be raining. Not much, but there's always some drizzle. There's always grey for long periods in the year, whereas in Barcelona, as we know, just 4 days ago on Monday, there was an intensely heavy thunderstorm for about 2 hours, and I imagine half of Barcelona's rainfall fell in 2 hours.
Yeah.
As soon as it stops, it goes back to being sunny, whereas it's just prolonged in London.
Yeah, in Barcelona it rains on 55 days a year, you're completely right, and in London 145 days. So similar rainfall amounts, but in London it rains on 3 times as many days. So looking more at a global view, seasons that we know in England, like spring, summer, autumn and winter, are only in the northern and southern hemispheres. In tropical areas they talk more about rainy, wet, monsoon, dry seasons. In Thailand, for example, when I was there, it's hot, rainy and cool seasons.
But here in Spain, people are talking about we're losing spring and autumn, in some people's opinion, because this year there wasn't really a noticeable spring, but winter seemed to drag on longer than normal, and then almost at the flick of a switch it became consistently sunny. And the same thing happened last year, where summer went on unnaturally long and it started to get cold and wintry without the transitional autumn period. So possibly that's linked in with global climate change, or it was just a strange year last year going into this year.
I think the weather seems to be all over the place nowadays, to be honest, but wherever we are it doesn't seem to be normal.
Well, as long as we're not causing it.
Yes. Now, the rainiest place on Earth is where, do you think?
Somewhere in the Amazon? Somewhere with lots of trees?
Colombia.
Ah.
There's a small town called Joro in Choco.
Where?
Choco in Colombia, and it's probably the place with the largest measured rainfall in the world, and it averages, they talk in metres for this place, 13.3 metres of rain a year. And a place very close to that recorded one year 25 metres of rain in 1 year, which is a ridiculous amount of rain. And yes, it's a very isolated area, I think, in Colombia, because I remember Colombia being quite sunny when I was there. Driest place on Earth. Somewhere else I went last year.
Ah, I remember you telling me by email that you were going there before you went. Is it Atacama?
Atacama Desert, mainly in Chile, but it also goes slightly into Peru and Bolivia. And it's, in some areas in the Atacama Desert, there's no life whatsoever, and there's no record of any rain at all. And in other areas, they have evidence that the riverbeds there have not had any rain in them for 120,000 years. They've been dry for 120,000 years. So, yes, incredibly dry place, a bit like another planet.
I hope you took some bottled water with you.
Yeah, I only went to San Pedro de Atacama, which is right on the edge, and that was a nice little town, and passed through some of the Atacama Desert. Beautiful landscapes though, beautiful. Hottest place in the world in Ethiopia, Dalol. Coldest, where do you think that is?
Has to be on the Arctic or the Antarctic.
Yeah, Antarctic Ridge, where it's minus 70 degrees on average in winter. Windiest is also in Antarctica. And what's this weather phenomenon that occurs every 5 to 7 years in the Pacific Ocean?
They call it El Nino, or another one, La Nina. I think maybe they go in opposite directions or something, but they're responsible for big changes in the weather and causing extreme weather conditions. Like
floods and droughts and things like that. So now we're going to change the topic. Well, not changing the topic at all, but we're going to talk a little bit about some useful and common expressions in English. And I'm going to say the weather type, and Mark's going to give an example. So, it's raining a lot today, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it's pissing it down.
Or?
It's raining cats and dogs.
Where did that expression come from? Raining cats and dogs?
Well, it's one of these kind of idioms that we use in English, and no one's 100% sure where it originated. But one theory is that back at some point in the Middle Ages, when people lived in thatched cottages, it was very cold. So cats and dogs used to kind of sleep in the rafters in the roof of these houses to benefit from the heat that would rise from the fire. But when it would rain heavily, the rain would come through the thatch and literally wash the cats and dogs out of the ceiling.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I read that the origin was in 17th and 18th century England, when after heavy rain, dead animals and other debris would sort of float along the streets. So they would see all these dead cats and dogs floating along and say it's raining cats and dogs. Nobody knows, but those are two possible origins. Okay, so it's a bit cold today, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it's quite nippy.
Or?
I'm freezing my tits off.
Or various other expressions include it's absolutely Baltic, or there's a nip in the air today.
Yeah, a nasty nip in the air.
And there's a bit of a nip in the air. It's very hot today on the beach, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sweating my tits off.
It's baking hot.
Roasting.
Scorching hot today.
Boiling.
Or to say it's really humid. Barcelona is very humid, isn't it?
It is. It gets very muggy at night.
Sometimes it feels very close, the weather in Barcelona.
And walking around in the evening, I often feel really clammy when I'm outside.
Clammy, sticky. Anyway, hope those expressions help you. What's likely to happen to the weather in the future, do you think?
Well, I'm no expert, but I think if it continues like this with global warming, we'll see more extremes of weather. If it gets hotter generally and the polar ice caps melt, they predicted that lots of parts of Europe will end up being underwater, so it could change the geography of Western Europe quite significantly, but it could also lead to more desertification, so the encroachment of the Sahara into more of southern Europe than just southern Spain where it is at the moment.
Yeah, and do you think we'll end up with tropical beaches in Skegness and Blackpool, those famous resorts in England?
If they're not underwater because of the polar ice caps, they might enjoy some very uncharacteristic weather. Sun?
Yeah, revival of Skegness, that would be an interesting one.
Yeah, British tourism from the 60s.
Anyway, this draws to the end our Series 2. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you come back for a possible Series 3 in the future. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Hola, me llamo Rose. La clase de lenguaje de hoy va sobre el tiempo. Como ya sabéis, todos los angloparlantes, y en especial los británicos, hablan del tiempo constantemente, así que vamos a reforzar algunas cosas que ya has oído en la conversación y además te vamos a enseñar más vocabulario relacionado con el tiempo, incluyendo fantásticas expresiones coloquiales. ¿Preparado? Empecemos. En las siguientes secciones vas a escuchar una palabra o expresión en inglés, seguida de su equivalente en español. Luego tendrás la oportunidad de practicar tu pronunciación repitiendo el vocabulario durante las pausas. Todos sabéis que cuando los ingleses dicen "it's hot", quieren decir que hace calor. Sin embargo, hay algunos adjetivos más creativos que la gente usa para hablar del calor extremo en inglés.
Roasting.
Hace un calor que te asas.
Roasting. Roasting. It was a roasting summer day. Scorching.
Hace un calor achicharrante.
Scorching. Scorching. Madrid in August is scorching hot. Sweltering.
Hace un calor sofocante.
Sweltering. Sweltering. Thailand in March is absolutely sweltering.
Y ahora un par de adjetivos geniales para describir la humedad. Humidity.
Clammy.
Bochornoso.
Clammy. Clammy. Barcelona in summer gets very clammy sometimes. Muggy.
Bochornoso.
Muggy. Muggy. Summer evenings in Spain can be very muggy.
Ahora, en vez de decir simplemente "it's cold", hace frío, ¿qué tal si no usar una de estas?
Nippy.
Hace frío.
Nippy. Nippy. Evenings by the sea in Spain are quite nippy. Chilly.
Hace fresquito.
Chilly. Chilly. In England, April is quite chilly. Freezing.
Congelado. Hace un frío que pela.
Freezing. Freezing. Last Christmas in England was absolutely freezing. Arctic.
Ártico o glacial.
Arctic. Arctic. All the airports closed because of the Arctic conditions.
¿Has oído alguna de estas expresiones en inglés? Que empiezan todas con B y que quieren decir "it's windy", ¿hace viento?
Breezy.
Sopla una brisa.
Breezy. Breezy. It's a breezy day, perfect for windsurfing. Blustery.
Borrascoso.
Blustery. Blustery. Tarifa in Spain is a very blustery place. Blowing.
Con muchísimo viento.
Blowing. Blowing. The weather's really blowing outside. There's a storm coming.
Vamos a acabar con algunas palabras y expresiones útiles para hablar de la lluvia. Rain, algo que seguro vas a necesitar si vas a Inglaterra.
Drizzling.
Lloviznando.
Drizzling. Drizzling. It's always drizzling in London, that's why we go to the pub. Torrential rain.
Una lluvia torrencial.
Torrential rain. Torrential rain. I've never seen such torrential rain as in Thailand. Pissing it down.
Coloquial y un poquito vulgar. Está lloviendo a cántaros.
Pissing it down. Pissing it down. It's absolutely pissing it down outside.
Ya está. Gracias por escuchar nuestra clase de lenguaje sobre expresiones coloquiales para hablar del tiempo. Si usas alguna de estas con el próximo hablante nativo que conozcas, seguro que quedará impresionado. Hasta la próxima. ¡Chao!
Gracias por acompañarnos con este podcast de Ingles.fm. Recuerda que el workbook contiene una transcripción completa de la conversación, listas de vocabulario, notas culturales y la clase. Lo puedes descargar de forma instantánea desde Ingles.fm. ¡Nos vemos!